Welcome to the Head Shepherd podcast. I'm your host, Mark Ferguson, CEO here at NextGen Agri International, where we help livestock managers get the best out of their stock. Before we get started, thank you to our two fantastic sponsors for continuing to sponsor this podcast. MSD Animal Health is perhaps better known as Cooper's Animal Health in Australia and for their Allflex range across the world, with a comprehensive suite of animal health and management products. Heineken is a one-stop shop for wool harvesting and animal fibre removal. The Heineken team have a deep understanding of livestock agriculture, backed by Swiss engineering and a family business dedicated to manufacturing the best. We are grateful to our sponsors for their support, helping us bring Head Shepherd to you each week. And now it's time to get on with this week's episode. Welcome back to Head Shepherd. You're with Ferg. Thanks, as always, for listening along. Thanks also to all those people that have reached out recently and let us know that the episodes they've liked. We always love getting those messages, love whether it's on Facebook Messenger or on text or email or however it turns up. We always love getting that feedback. So thanks to the many people who've done that. This week on the show, we've got Dr Whit Stewart. He's Associate Professor and an Extension Sheep Specialist at the University of Wyoming. He's been in New Zealand for a sabbatical, and we'll get to Whit soon and talk about his story. Before we get into that, this week you can find an article on the Hub, linked on the Hub, which is written by Dr. Emmett Pettigrew from our team, and it's titled "What Makes a Good Ram Buying Decision." Pretty close to our heart here at NextGen Agri, and relevant as we lead into ram sale season in Australia, and not too far away from that in New Zealand as well. A good reminder there of the kind of things that need to be considered when we're out there buying rams. The landscape is always changing. There's always new information. There's traits that become more important and maybe some that become less important over time. So well worth a read. We're not too far away from releasing our ram buying guide in New Zealand, which we've released final version Australia and final version in New Zealand, but our strong wool version or crossbred version is coming to New Zealand soon. So keep an eye out for that. It's a great resource, again, that kind of helps people walk through that will navigate that ram buying decision. Okay, we'll get underway with this week's show with Dr. Whit Stewart. He's been in New Zealand. This was recorded when he was in New Zealand. By the time you're listening to it, he'll actually be on his way back to the US, back to Wyoming, where he does sheep extension there, as well as teaching at the University of Wyoming. He's got an extensive background. Obviously, the US is not as known for sheep as it is for cattle, but it's great to chat with Whit, and we share a lot of passions in common, and it was great to meet him when he was over here in New Zealand. So I hope you enjoy this week's show. Welcome, Whit, to Head Shepherd.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic, mate. Great to have someone who is got some knowledge on both sides of the ocean, really. So obviously your home is there in the University of Wyoming, but you've spent a few months, or last quite a few months in New Zealand. So living the good life of secondment.
Yeah. Sabbatical's been a good refresher, and I'm the student again, and that feels good.
Excellent. We might, maybe we will just clarify where you work and what you do. So Associate Professor and Extension Sheep Specialist at University of Wyoming. Did I get that right? Or?
Yeah. So, what that translates to is research, extension mostly, which is working with producers one-on-one. And then we do some research, and I teach 2 classes on campus, an advanced wool evaluation and an advanced sheep production. So I'm lucky enough to just focus on the ovine.
Excellent. So we might start with that background, how you sort of ended up with a passion for ovines in a country that's passionate about bovines?
Yeah, I'd say it probably starts with ruminants. I grew up on a cow-calf and a ewe-lamb operation in Western New York, and people think of New York as being an urban environment, but it's really rural where I'm from, a small town called Forestville. And so my dad and my mom started a farm back there in New York, originally from Western roots. And that's where I was born and raised, and that's where I got the bug. Mostly sheep until I was about 10, and then my parents split up and then got into the beef cattle side of things, and then a bobby calf operation. And grad school kind of brought me back to sheep. But it's funny how what is kind of inside you bubbles back up at different phases in life, right? The cyclical learning that everybody goes through. And what they can do from producing meat, wool, and milk, it's just kind of the ultimate species in my eyes.
Yeah, well, you won't have any arguments here, particularly not with our editor, Sophie, who loves sheep more than oxygen almost. No, you're among friends on head shepherd, but I guess we're keen to have a chat today to not really to contrast industries, but obviously you've had exposure to both the US sheep industry as well as the New Zealand sheep industry, and I'm sure more globally than that. So it'd be today's conversation is a bit about what's happening over there in the US sheep industry as well as kind of what you've seen since you've been here. I guess at a high level, how would you characterise the differences between sort of, I guess, Wyoming and New Zealand? And I imagine that's quite a significant difference.
Yeah, I think what's been fun here, Ferg, is thinking about when I talk to producers and other, academics or extension people, they are quick to talk about the beef industry, but it's almost like our sheep industry is forgotten in the U.S. And there's what we consider to be a strong, vibrant industry. It's not as large as it once was, but close to 100,000 head of producers left, or 100,000 operations left in the U.S. Maybe producing less lamb than we used to. Right now, we're sitting around a little over 5 million head of sheep. But I guess what's interesting to me is that those that depend on sheep for their livelihood, it's still an extremely important livestock species in the U.S. When you look at the U.S., I will try not to be remiss here. Our land mass is so big that the diversity of our sheep industry, from maybe more grass-based heritage sheep type operations in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, areas that traditionally haven't been as large in sheep production. Those seem to be areas that are growing over time, especially with the advent of solar grazing. And then where I'm at in the Western sheep industry, kind of really our stronghold of the sheep industry ever since its origins, larger flocks, more of a continental type climate, so cold winters, where there's lots of extra feed inputs, make it a very, very different industry. And then you go down to the southern plains of Texas, which is a large sheep producing area. 3/4 of that flock these days, which used to be all Rambouillet and fine wool country, is now hair cross genetics. And so I view it as an industry not in decline, but in constant change in the U.S. and responding to the local markets that we have developed and maybe the traditional commodity markets that I work in. One of the really cool things about where I'm at is in the Western U.S., we still do a lot of the transhuman grazing where we take our flocks up into the high country in the summer. Usually it's federal or state grazing allotments where they spend their summer on pretty high quality, high alpine pastures. And then as the summer progresses into the fall, we go back to our wintering grounds in the lowlands and sagebrush steppe or other home bases across ranches. So, I mean, you have some of that diversity too, but we probably have it at a greater scale just because it is such a geographically diverse area. Where I'm at, we're dealing with 300 to 400 mils of precip. And so it makes our production system very, very seasonal. We lamb right in advance of the grass. The grass maintains its quality for a couple months, and then it dissipates pretty rapidly, and we have to market our lambs. And so I guess that leads me to one of the major differences, I think, is I've looked at sheep marketing systems here. If you were to ask the average commercial producer in the West to look at his pay slip from who paid for his lambs, the check often isn't coming directly from the packer. A lot of producers sell their lambs, at an auction or a video auction on a cash market basis, which generally speaking is anywhere from a 30 kilogram to a 40 kilogram feeder lamb that then moves down the chain to either a lamb finisher, a lamb backgrounder, maybe growing slow on grass or going straight to the finishing phase. And what that looks like for us is that we have a lot of industry segments in the West that once that lamb leaves the ranch gate, we often don't know a lot what happens to it, where it goes down the production chain. So I think that's a really big difference as well. And you stop me because we've talked about this a little bit on the side as well, if I'm missing something. I guess the other glaring difference that I think is sometimes it's a dead end of a talking point is that we have we struggle with predators dramatically in the U.S. Coyotes being a primary source of lamb loss and ewe loss for us, but where I'm at, it's federally protected species that do wreak havoc on some of our production systems. Like the golden eagle is something that we don't talk about a lot, but in Wyoming alone, we have very few tools to deal with the golden eagle as it's federally protected. And a group of juvenile golden eagles will sit on a group of replacement ewes or even lambs and take away 30 to 40% of your lamb crop. And you're left with very little to do to deter that predation. And so I think contrasting the differences, you guys also have predators, but they're not animal predators. Your predators are nematodes, right? And maybe fungal pathogens. but I don't want to diminish the effect of predation, but I think that's a major contrast in our systems. We may not lose as much as we say we do to the predators, but the emotional toll that it takes on producers is something that I wish the general public better understood. As we have these debates about maintaining wildlife habitat and making room for coexistence, which is easily done. These systems are made to coexist, and good environmental stewardship and production are not exclusive to one another. But if people could step back and just see the toll it takes on growers when you're seeing animals injured or outright harvested by wild animals, it gets to be pretty tough. And then I guess the last thing is just because a majority of our western states are public land, there's a lot of requirements that we have to fulfill in terms of just regulatory challenges that exist. Anywhere from monitoring of the forage resource to making sure that we maintain separation with wild sheep populations to the mandated labor increases that we have to pay some of our H2A herders who are awesome partners on our operations, but the cost of labor continues to be a real challenge. And that's no different than here, right? And I think that's another similarity that I'll just conclude with is that the challenges that we all face across the globe are strikingly similar.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Just to drill in on that land ownership bit, because I don't understand the industry in the US at all, but so land is leased from state or whatever, so people don't own their farms, or they do own parts of their farms and lease some country, or how's that work?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I would say that all operations have a home base with some of their own grazing resource, but to run at a scale that they need to be profitable or to exist, their summer grazing and to a large extent their winter grazing leases are either mostly a federal entity, the Forest Service for the summer allotments mostly, and then your Bureau of Land Management, which are leases that the producer would pay. So there is private ownership. Where I'm at in the central part, where I work with producers in the central part of Wyoming, it's called checkerboard, which is a remnant of the old railroad days, where you'll have private contiguous with public land sections. And so you have longstanding leases that allow you to graze some of those, which all are paid for and none of it is free.
Okay. Interesting. You gave me a hat from your university the other day when we met, and it was brown and gold. And your point was that's most of the year that's the color of the state. So it's obviously similar to where I grew up.
Yeah, it's funny that those colors. I love that there are university colors because there's no sugar coating it, right? It's an unforgiving but beautiful landscape that we work in, and a lot of the Mountain West region that Wyoming is surrounded by. But it makes, when you stop and think about what the sheep are able to thrive on, it's pretty impressive. Yeah,
and just finally on that geography, when you're talking high country, that's significant elevation over there.
Yeah, so we are where I'm at in Laramie. If you bear with me, I'm going to do the meters. Shame on me for not knowing this as well. But we're at 7,000 feet. So, yeah, when you think about how high elevation we are, most of our state is anywhere from 2,100 meters down to, we don't have anything lower than 1,500 meters in our state. So it's really high elevation. high plains, Rocky Mountain type function of the ecosystem.
Yeah, right. Excellent. Obviously, Australia sends a hell of a lot of lamb into the US, often quite big carcass weight because of, well, I'm assuming that's what the market's used to. In terms of the focus there, is it's all domestically consumed out of your state, or is it export somewhere? Or?
Yeah, great question. So, again, thinking about just like people, there's tremendous variation across our systems. But I would argue that, with 350 million consumers in the U.S., we have a range of our traditional commodity systems where in Wyoming, we will sell a feeder lamb late summer, early fall. Those will go to a feeding enterprise. They'll be harvested, always with under a year of age, but sometimes we'll extend those lambs at a slower plane of growth, and they will be sold. Basically, we have 2, maybe 3 large packers left in the U.S. That's something that I think is interesting to contrast. You tell me, as I tell you, how many total lamb harvest plants you have in the country of New Zealand. We have plants that can kill over 1,000 head a day. We probably have 4 of those left in the U.S., the entire U.S. So those larger plants serve states like Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, that we have these larger flocks that need to accommodate, that really provide the supply of fresh lamb in the U.S. The Rocky Mountain region alone, I calculated this a couple of weeks ago, we're sitting around 41% of all the lamb produced in the U.S. is coming from that region. So while we have tremendous growth in smaller flocks across the country, feeding that commodity system that then feeds into our food distribution, our restaurant distribution, and our supermarket distribution, we don't have the infrastructure that we used to have. And relatedly, the lamb feeding hub of the U.S. as it exists now, there is operations throughout the upper Midwest, the Intermountain West, and everywhere in between where there's farming enterprises that will finish these lambs. They'll market their crops, obviously, through the lambs and feed out those lambs. But the traditional hub of the largest lamb feeding region was built around the processing infrastructure, which is in that Denver, Colorado Front Range. So a lot of the sheep in the country go there and are finished in some of those feedlots. Now, there's exception. Grass-fed lamb does exist in the U.S., and we do that. And I would argue that even those feedlot finished lambs, there's the majority of their life they're on grass. It's just the finishing phase that they're there. And this isn't what you're asking, Mark, but I think it's a good point that I think as I've talked with people here and help them understand is that because our lambs are being weaned in the late summer and fall and going into a feeding system, that is when our predation is the highest. That's when the coyotes are teaching their pups to hunt. And so we not only finish lambs in feedlots because we run out of forage, it's a cool season grass forage infrastructure, but it's an animal welfare concern for us. And getting those lambs marketed in somewhere where we aren't going to incur those losses and have those animal welfare issues is an important consideration for us in U.S. production systems. Now, I will say this because, again, I'm jumping around on you, but I think it's important to understand is livestock guardian animals are a huge tool and are continuing to be essential just for survival in the U.S. sheep industry. So livestock guardian dogs, to a lesser extent, guard donkeys, guard llamas, they are really, really important for us to maintain viability. And they work, but they're like anything. They're a management tool, and they really have got to be treated as such, much like you'll maintain a tractor or side-by-side. The dogs are the same.
Yeah, massively. I was in Ontario last year, and massively important there for any of the outdoor farm bases. Yeah, that was pretty, very, very important to keep coyotes away. You have spent, 6-7 months in New Zealand. Not sure how long it's been, but it's a while. I guess I'm assuming you managed to talk somebody into doing a sabbatical over here because you're going to take something home to Wyoming. So far, what's that looking like? What have you sort of seen here that that's maybe surprised you most, and things that might translate back into Wyoming operations?
Well, this is an opportunity to express some gratitude, Mark, because you prompted me, and a shameless pitch. But my hosts at Lincoln University, really grateful to them, Dr. David Scobie, Andy Greer, Tom Maxwell, and then my hosts at Beef and Lamb that I've been able to work with. Really grateful. I think that's something culturally that I really think New Zealand is top notch. Is their just willingness to share information. I was visiting with a colleague from Lincoln recently, and she said, "Give away your best information." And I feel like that is a theme that I've come across here. It's a genuine theme. It's not something that's fabricated. So I'm really grateful for that. I have to say that. But if I was to categorize, getting back to your question, what are some of the things that I've gathered? It's me picking it's like I'm sifting gold nuggets here because there's so many of them. So bear with me as I try to talk about some of these. Because I work with producers, and I don't always do a good job working with producers. I'm a researcher. Sometimes I get lost in that minutia, right? We love the science, and we got to make sure we translate it. I really have come to appreciate the decision-making tools that exist here and that the producers use. Everything from the grazing charts like FarmIQ, FarmX. There's a million of them that I need to do a better job with. But I visited with ranchers that use these for their team to know when they went into a paddock, what's the average production in a paddock, when they can go back to that, to, worm management tools to selectively treat and hopefully extend the use of dewormers. There's such goodness in decision-making tools because it doesn't necessarily, it's just a more sustainable system. We're not prescribing answers, right? And you got to have boots on the ground. Those have to be good informed assumptions to make those calculators work. But at the end of the day, man, I love your use of decision-making tools. And I feel, a call to do more of that for my producers in my region, in my state. This is a no-brainer, but I think your use of technology and your willingness to adapt technology, your mindset being an export producing country, you're constantly adapting to change. And I know that sounds really cliche, right? Oh, let's be drivers of change and let's, whatever, let's be growth mindset, right? And I don't want to diminish those because you got to, but there's action that I've seen from producers that, if your consumer says, sorry, I don't want your product because of X, Y, and Z, you're scrambling to help them understand why your product is the right product, right? And so I feel like there's a proactive approach when you've got these markets that aren't at your front door and that you have to be responsive to making sure you fit the specs abroad. That's something that I've really appreciated as I've talked with some of the growers and my colleagues here. It's a can-do attitude. We have that too in the U.S. Don't get me wrong, but it's a different mindset that I have seen being in an export-producing country. I could go on if you want me to. The forage agronomy, right? What has always made me excited about producing livestock is that moment when you open the gate and their heads are down and you can hear the leaves being torn off, right, in the grass, and those contented ewes, and you can stop and admire things and take stock of where you're at. I'd loved being a small part of that, working on some diverse forage trials with my colleagues here. I even got to move some sheep onto some fodder beets here the other day, and we don't always do those things in Wyoming because we don't have the forage resource or the water resource. But you've been exporting forage excellence for years across the globe. But man, I think how we winter use, maybe doing a little bit more with our forage brassicas in certain situations in the U.S., the shared challenge of feed gaps and maintaining condition on ewes. And we are so fortunate in the U.S. that we do have access to affordable energy and protein supplements. And here you don't have that luxury as much. And so seeing you manage that forage resource is, again, it's maybe simple and everybody may take it for granted, but it's a beautiful thing when it's done well.
Yeah. Interesting points. I think I've got this right. You're sort of bringing some producers from Wyoming into New Zealand before you head home. I guess what's the what are you hoping that they'll pick up from that international exposure, as well as obviously there's always good things of traveling as a group and learning together. There's heaps of good reasons why you do those sort of things. But I guess if you had a couple of things that you'd like to tick off with that program, what are they?
Yeah, I hope I've transmitted that I'm passionate about the primary sector, right? And training the next generation is probably the most important thing we can do. You and I have talked about that. That's our legacy, right? Whether it's our immediate family or the next generation, we know the goodness that comes from walking in a pasture and working with livestock. But we've got to build that next generation more aggressively than we ever have. And I think this Sheep Innovators Exchange is a group of young ranchers from Wyoming and the surrounding region that we don't need to prescribe and orchestrate a tour for them, only to give them an opportunity to see and talk to other farmers. I guess that's where the beauty is. It's always been that way, is when you get farmers together and they can talk with each other. I think the nature of living remotely, especially in my state, Wyoming is about the entire landmass of New Zealand, and it's the least populated state in the United States, 600,000 people. I think it's easy to get isolated, right? It's easy to get in our own heads sometimes, and the ability to go somewhere else, especially a country that really is proud of their sheep heritage, right? I'd say Australasia is pretty proud of the ovine, and so for us that are hanging on in the sheep business in the U.S. and that have made that our calling. Man, you can come to a country and see those common bonds that we all share across the globe in producing lamb and wool, milk to some extent. So, yeah, I want to facilitate learning between producers to see some things that may challenge some thinking, and then keep this going. I hope to keep doing this Innovators Exchange in other parts of the globe and coming back here and hosting New Zealand producers at some point. So building those bridges in a world, I think, that is increasingly, how do I say this sounding diplomatic, isolated and maybe fearful. I think there's always been such a profound impact through collaboration and understanding others. So how's that for a warm and fuzzy answer?
Sounds perfect, mate. Yeah, no, I'm sure it'll be great. And yeah, we've had the opportunity to host groups and be part of groups and stuff, and they're always fantastic to get away and learn from others. And yeah, and as you say, just get people talking who are both passionate or all passionate about the same stuff. It always good things come from that. I guess we think a fair bit about genetics and breeding at NextGen, and we spent a fair bit of time on Head Shepherd talking about genetics as well. Maybe just quickly, the breeds that you're sort of dealing with, the selection pressures that are kind of top of mind there for producers compared, maybe comparison here, or just what's happening in the US there in terms of what traits people would be sort of putting their emphasis on, and maybe to what degree some of the technologies of genomics, breeding values, all that sort of stuff, like is there scope for better in the US, or is that all pretty much covered?
Yeah, there's significant room for improvement in the US in adoption of those technologies. Even the quantitative side, like estimated breeding values, right? A lot of rams still are sold visually in our region, which again doesn't mean they're bad genetics, but when we can select for more specific traits, like traits of importance to us in the Western U.S., are a composite set of traits through the Western Range Index, where it takes number of lambs born. Because we have such predation issues, we put less pressure on number of lambs weaned, because that may not be genetic necessarily. Fleece weight, weaning weight, and then some emphasis on keeping our body size from getting too large. That's kind of an index that's really popular in the Western U.S. because it's worked. As you go east and you look at the more humid, temperate conditions, fecal egg count EBVs are really, really important for for all of our breeds operating in those environments. So we would not put as much pressure on that in our region, because other than irrigated pastures, we don't have a whole lot of parasite issues, especially with some of the strongyle species. So it varies by region. Can we improve? Absolutely. And I guess I think one thing that's been really cool to see here is, in the US, sometimes we look abroad and we see all your numbers and we say, everybody selects on an estimated breeding value. Everybody knows what genomics are, right? I think our forward thinkers and people on your podcast absolutely do, but sometimes we don't talk to the people in the middle, and there's a lot of people in the middle in the commercial side of the industry that we could do a better job educating why these things work. The stud growers obviously need to be the leading edge there, but I think it's been interesting to see that some of the challenges of overcoming our eye, the bias of our eye, exist anywhere in the world, right? Sometimes we put that fallible phenotypic selection in front of the quantitative, real, proven accuracy side of things, and so it's been good to see that even in a great country like New Zealand, we have all mixes of those. I will say though, it's been cool to see almost all of the stud breeders, and maybe in my select group that I've looked through catalogs and got to see some of the sales, they are collecting a lot of data because your challenges with other like foot related challenges, facial eczema, parasite challenges. If you don't put some selection pressure on those, you correct me if I'm wrong, I just feel like your time in the business is numbered.
And that obviously very different climates, and massively important, those traits to keep, and getting increasingly so. I guess labour availability is something you've already touched on. Climate variability is something that there's always, it's the wettest on record or the hottest on record or the driest on record, or like it's increasingly we're getting these things, and that puts pressure on our systems. And I guess, for us, it means really having built in as much of that, fortifying as much of those animals as we can to those environmental pressures, which end up being disease pressures, I suppose. But I guess, is there anything in terms of maybe innovation that producers in the US are out in front of, like anything we can learn from your guys or from what you've seen, some things that are probably not going as well here as they could be? Is there any opportunity there, do you think?
Yeah. Boy, I don't want to sound like I'm patting everyone on the back, right? Because that sounds, I think
Kiwis don't respond to that very well. But
I've noticed that, right? Yeah, so maybe this will be your least viewed podcast as a result of that. I do think that one thing that I think is interesting is I'm curious how literate the average Kiwi producer is on the consumer abroad, right? I think not that we always have a great handle on that in the US, but we know that we struggle to compete with shelf space with Australian and New Zealand lamb based on a price basis, right? As I've talked to people, I wish that more people were aware that the US has a sheep industry, and that sheep industry is important, and understanding that the American consumer is not just a client, right? That they're different, they're unique, and understanding that at some point that distance to the American consumer is coming down the pike. And I know that may sound a bit sensational, but we've seen some of the trade disruption that's occurring, right? And I think those of us left in the U.S. sheep industry are doggedly committed to getting more American lamb in front of our consumers. And we need to do a better job sharing the merits of our production systems. But I guess this is not a selection or technology equation, because you are also laser focused on productivity here. But I do think understanding a little bit more about who your consumer is something that we all could benefit from. Maybe that's too generic of an answer. Let me think of one more, because I just think this is a great question.
While you're thinking, I think, just my own sort of reflection on that, and I think it's really true. When we are an island far away from anywhere in New Zealand and also in Australia, really. I mean, both where most of our listeners are in those two countries, and far away from our ultimate consumers. And a lot of the things we produce, obviously in Australia, we eat a fair chunk of the lamb produced there as well. But it was interesting. We were up, I think I mentioned I was in Silicon Valley for a couple of times, and once where there were some producers from New Zealand, and we were the design school set a job to go out and talk to people on the street about kind of what we do. And I think people were genuinely amazed that people had no idea where New Zealand was and what we did and didn't care. And that was, and I think that blows people's minds when you're down here, that we can get a bit, I guess maybe start thinking that we produce this amazing product that everyone's just absolutely wants to get on their plate, and then we should be beating them away with a stick. But the reality is most people don't know who we are, what we do, and that's important that we do actually understand that. And we see brands that have kind of broken through that, and Acton's Ranch is a good example, that have gone over there and embedded themselves in the market to learn, and actually lived in that market to really understand it. And I think it's a great thing for, and it is a bit sort of cliche to understand your market, but it's so important to know who those consumers are. And not, I think we spend enough time. I was going to say too much time, but we spend a lot of time thinking about sort of our markets as in the borders of our own country, rather than where they really are, which is that global market. But that's given you a bit of time to think while I tell my story. But.
Yeah, I think the other thing that is, because it is my area, I don't even want to say expertise, it sounds pretentious, but my training is in sheep nutrition. And so I work a lot in my position at the university, and then help some other people out of state with nutrition, precision nutrition strategies. And I think, all industries are going to struggle with keeping the right amount of condition on their sheep. It's the attention to those little things, right, that matter the most. But I don't know, our use of supplements and some of our precision management and some of our more housed feeding systems, I don't know. I think we overcome some of those subclinical deficiencies, and we have the ability to overcome maybe even some of our subclinical gastrointestinal nematode challenges, our worm challenges, through a little bit more precision nutrition. And so I'm curious. I maybe should spend more time in the supplement side of things, but supplements are at added cost. But for us, our ability to mix and match feed ingredients due to the size of our ag industry, and really implement some real precision supplementation is something that maybe I haven't seen as much here utilized at scale. But yeah, I wish I had a better critique to really light a fire under your producer.
It's a good point, though. I've got many limitations, but one of them is my knowledge of the sort of of your sort of micronutrients and the interplays that happen both in the soil level, the plant level, and then right through to the animal level, and kind of how all that comes together is something that I wish I had could wave a wand and increase my knowledge. And probably, to be honest, I haven't tried that hard to increase my knowledge, but I do think that and I think that's been a bit of a challenge for our industry, because you get sort of what we term as snake oil salesmen sort of coming up the driveway with some sort of new seaweed product or new something product, and there's always something good in those products, but then there's this kind of what was a cost benefit equation, and there's also, is this just a sort of placebo, or is it real? And I think we've probably had examples of both, and so people are skeptical of those things. But I think you're right. We have a lot. There's still a fair bit to learn in sort of sorting those micronutrients out. And I know I've got a few clients and a few colleagues that are kind of trying to go down that rabbit hole to really understand that, because I think we are missing things when we just try to. Chemistry doesn't always just stack up as easy as it should. It's all the interplays that we have to kind of get our heads around. But
one thing, though, Mark, is we're still talking about this, is that I think we in the U.S. sometimes, not even in the U.S., I think it's probably human behavior to say, okay, if I buy this one thing, it will be the fix that will overcome everything, right? And it's the psychology, and I don't know if the Kiwi producer is more frugal in this regard, but sometimes we're too willing to spend money on supplements that honestly will not have any return on investment at certain stages of the production cycle, right? And so I do think that the art of producing frugally in an era when sometimes consumption is the loudest thing that we hear. I wonder if internationally we all just need to tighten the belt sometimes. I mean, we talk about all these other tools that we could use to make us more resilient in the face of tremendous climatic uncertainty, right, and change there. But I think at the end of the day, I have found that a lot of people don't like taking a look at their own spending practices. And it needs to be more than once a year, probably, when you meet with your accountant. And maybe that is a commonality that exists everywhere, because we're human beings. The ability to scrutinize our inputs and look at them more closely and really question: Are they getting a return on investment? Are they getting us better resilience? for risk, those kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit like maybe the emotion is. This is not a very good example, but the emotional impact you talked about with predators, like it's much more than losing a sheep. If you lose a sheep to predation because of the way it went, and so that has a big impact. And I think the same when it comes to nutrition at the other end, we just want our sheep to be happy, and so we're kind of willing to throw things at them to try and make them healthier and happier. And sometimes they're amazing things to throw at them, and it all works. And other times it's just kind of placebos that make us feel better. We put a lick block out that's got some protein in it or something to utilise that green grass, but would have been there's always or often more efficient ways to get the same outcome. But yeah, I think we do, and I think you can, by being careful with that investment, you can invest more and make more, but we have to be mindful that not everything is going to work, and there are unfortunately no silver bullets. The last couple of questions, Whit, that we ask everybody, or sometimes the hardest, or I don't know, the ones I find the most interesting, or sometimes, but anyway. But the second last one is, what is the last thing you changed your mind about?
Oh, last thing I changed my mind about, that is, Mark, this is where things go off the rails, isn't it? Right? Because people get philosophical.
Yeah. That's the point. Yeah.
Oh, well,
they can hold it together for so long, and then we try and break them at the end.
Yeah, that's right. Then you pull you pull them off stage. Well, I would say this. Yeah, because I've had I feel like the luckiest person in the world. And my producers want to string me up because I've been gone, but I've been the most fortunate individual in the world. I brought my whole family down to New Zealand, and we've lived here. We've done the day-to-day stuff, and I think one thing that I changed my mind about recently is I used to believe scaling was kind of the only way to grow impact. Right? I used to think you gotta work harder, you gotta spend more hours doing things. You got to publish more papers. You got to help more producers. You got to do more. And I think now I'm, again, reminding myself that it's about the depths of relationships and focus you give to those that really is the most important thing out there. In extension, we talk about, I'm a sheep extension specialist, right? And then I consult with sheep producers. It's really about the relationships. That's what it's all about, right? Yes, we got to help people be more productive and help them stay on the land. But at the end of the day, that's only done by the strength of those relationships. And when you scale and you run at a pace that is all about scale, you no longer see the shine in those things, right? You no longer see the diamonds that those relationships are. And so I guess that's personally what I've recently changed my mind on. Now, we should do this interview again in a year, and you could remind me that this is the one thing I changed my mind about, because we're all prone to shift back into previous behavior, but too often we just forget that in the day-to-day that it's about the depth of those relationships. So. Excellent.
That's why we asked the question, and luckily this will be recorded, so you can play it back to yourself in 12 months' time and see what you. And then the final question is. Is often equally provoking, but who's the best human you've had the pleasure to learn from?
Best human I had the pleasure to learn from. Does anyone ever say multiple or no?
Yeah, I had to go. I got it down to 6 for myself. So
yeah. Well, I'll start by saying this. I married my best friend, and she's a visual arts kind of a person, but works in project management, and so she has continually across our 16 years has allowed me to see the clover and the ryegrass, those little things that you're just like, give you those intrinsic amounts of joy. So definitely Lindsay, but my grandfather, who kind of started me on the path and the passion for the science of livestock production and learning about that. And then my dad, who kind of gave me the grit of how to do it. You raise bobby calves at scale, and that kind of gut wrenching production system will harden you pretty quick. So I'm grateful for my dad for that. But then I think about I get to work with generations in the sheep business that are my grandparents' age, less so now, all the way down to now who are my kids' age, right? So those individual interactions across generations working in a field that you love give such a richness that you can't, I've been working on a book since I've been down here, talking about what we lose when we move too far away from agriculture, not just the natural resource, but the lessons and the quality of our lives, right? And I've just been reflecting on these interactions, and I feel like the luckiest guy on earth because I've had so many of them. So I would just say the ranchers I work with, the students I work with, the people I've met here in New Zealand, the relationships I built over the years across the country in the sheep industry, those are the best people I've met.
Awesome, Whit. That's been a fantastic chat and really enjoyed it. I loved catching up the other day. It took us 6 months to actually finally meet since you've been over here, but I'm glad we did. And really, hopefully we'll continue that for years to come.
Likewise, I really do hope so as well, Mark. And in the next 3-4 weeks, let's get together before it gets too late. So.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks, mate. Good to chat.
Always good to chat. Let me know how I can help. Anytime, brother.
Thanks again to Heinegger, who are proud world leaders in the manufacturing and supply of professional sheep shearing and clipping equipment. Thank you to MNSD Animal Health and Norflex Livestock Intelligence. They offer an extensive livestock product portfolio focused on animal health management, all backed up by exceptional service. We thank both of these companies for their ongoing support of the Head Shepherd podcast.